that Jamanyasha, Diki, that Mipatilla Karesana, Luda, Choata, and Semna Chö said the Shaku Pekarchin Shavare Lamna, and Gimzen de la Chibanamki, and the Louis the Dagi Tinchi Gores, and Lula Mipiki Chapaki Gores, and Dinza, and Choa Sadi, and de la Lonju Shires. The Luda, Choa, Sem, Chö said the Jamanya Mipal Sharwa, the Shaku Gimzen Shigorwa, Shaku Gimzakare Lamna, and the Lude, and Chibanam get Dagi Tinchi Gores. It's not that it didn't get Sherwa. It's not so I said it, Dagalon should be serious, Sim said Dagon Mobores. It's not Chelada and Chaso Gage in Yomobada, Desolas of a Yom Benimbo, Desohago with Childo, and Dinza, Mipashava Eseti, all those channels, this is your way to go.
Good afternoon. So this morning we continue to look at the observed objects of the four close placements of mindfulness and why these four objects are the observed objects. We saw that the body is the basis for the self, hence the body is the first observed object. Feelings are how the self is experienced, and therefore it is the second observed object. And the third is the mind, as this is tends to be seen or taken as the illustration of the self, and therefore it is the third observed object. And fourthly is phenomena, which includes many other things, including the afflictions which need to be abandoned.
And Dagi Nigi Ngobodang, and Dagi Lonjugi Shidang, Dagi Ngobodang, Kunya Yomobada, number of Ngobo, she soon be serious, Gundules, Tajingaji, the Shuva to Najiware, Gundunala Carsonres, and Louis Sedi, and Jamai, Yashaki, Miba Shaba de Carolana, they are Dagi, Nigi Ngobo images, and Jibanamgi, Louis Dago, Tienchi Ngobores, Tiense Ngobo images. Dagi Lonju Shidang led to Soadi, and then Dagi Lonju Shires, Lonju Shidi Soares, Soa Diduk, the Kansadi Union, the Carson Soad and Gyälwa Dunga Yungores, Shires. Dagi Ngobo City, same the Dagi Ngobores, the Datu to Batsimbe, she. The Nekuni, Da Kunya Yomoba, number of Ngobo in Bishir City, Tisan Dalan, meaning as a Yomoba, Gene, the Yomoba. Kowa Nyomobache, the name Yomoba the Poyagi, Tab Lamdi Carson, number Changobose, or that Lamdi Yamnajadik, Tiriso, Disore, the inside the Mipa Shavare said, the Gundin Halaba to Sonsharwa.
Then returning to the text, at the bottom of page 2 is another quotation from Asanga's Compendium of Knowledge, which repeats what was said immediately above. The impermanent phenomena that are, one, the abode of the self, the basis of the self's experience, the impermanent phenomenon that is the self, and the impermanent phenomenon that is the self of either the thoroughly afflicted class or the completely pure class. Again, then, this quotation asserts that the four objects that are observed by mindfulness and wisdom in this practice are the body, and secondly, feelings, the experiences of happiness and suffering, which is happiness and suffering. Then thirdly, the self, which is taken as the illustration of the I. And then phenomena, the fourth observed object, which includes all the minds to be abandoned, namely the afflictions, as well as their opposing virtuous minds that are to be cultivated. So again, this quotation reasserts that these are the four objects of observation.
잠만이죠 겁나시기로.
Over the page, on page 3, we come to the second of the 8 outlines, the way to perform this meditation. So how do bodhisattvas on the path of accumulation engage in the meditation on the 4 close placements of mindfulness? This now is set out on pages 3 and 4.
다 잠만이죠 겁나데라 아니 니여레지 투모와 겁나나 투모마임바 니레스 투모와다 투모마임바 니레스도 제산 잠만이죠 겁나데르 투모와 겁나 직제 아니 투모마임바 검수세데 겁나데르 림바 니용그레지레.
Well, there are 2 ways that bodhisattvas meditate on the 4 close placements of mindfulness, those which are common or shared, and those which are uncommon or unique. The first, those which are shared or common, we see immediately below with the number 1, and on page 4, a little down from the top, there's a number 2, and this is the division into unique or uncommon.
투모와 겁나라데 가르라네 미니 다 미바유디 류소 류다 초와다 셈다 안취시디 지바체 나 고묘도 투모와 검시디 미니 년퇴다 라잔남기 겁나디다 다 전유sem바남기 겁나 지바로 직전 저나 겁나 지바로 겁나 지어와 데니고 마틸라 네 투모와 검수시거래.
The first division is that which is common or shared. And what does the term common or shared refer to? Well, these 4 objects of observation that we looked at previously are meditated on in a shared way or common manner by the 3 different kinds of beings. The 2 of the Thevadan type, the Thevadan lineage, the hearers and solitary realizers, as well as of the Mahayana lineage, the bodhisattvas. These 2 groupings, or these 3 lineages, meditate in the same way on the 4 observed objects. Therefore, they have this shared meditation or this common meditation.
년퇴다 라년은 마곰바체 제주선바 그런거 겁나 주로와 겁냐 주로와 될 투모마이 바곰바서 투모마이 바.
Then the way of meditating on those 4 observed objects of body, feeling, mind and phenomena that is uncommon or unshared or unique is in the second outline on which is on page 4. And here the bodhisattvas meditate in a way that is unshared with the hearers and solitary realizers. So the hearers and solitary realizers have one approach which is distinct from that of the bodhisattvas, although the 4 observed objects remain the same. So what distinguishes these 2 techniques of common and uncommon is not the observed objects, they are the same, but whether between the 3 types of beings, or the 2 of the Thevadan lineage and the 1 of the Mahayana lineage, if they meditate in a common or uncommon manner on those 4 observed objects.
나디네 나당보 투모와 곰나디시고래 당보니 지들 곰수여대 쓰데 간스 곰고래스네 다 곰나디네 곰고래서 지다 곰수여대 아니 류초르 셈치 실라 랑지 천이니게 단에 곰벌집이 싫어서 제나다 투모와 곰나네 간스 곰고래람나 미바디 류다 초하다 아니 가실레 류레 미제 미바 류레 미제 류기 때도 랑게 천이다 지 천이니게 제바제 단에 아니 곰고래 지제 대 투모 곰나래디 안디나시 미바데 초와레 미제 단도 초와들이야 아니 랑게 천이스다 지 천이게 천이 김전 니니 제바제제 곰고래스 대 안에 대학 투모 곰나제 다 미바 셈라 미제 셈이디 때도 랑게 천이다 지 천이 아니 니니게 다제 제바제제 곰고래스 아니 최 미바 최라 미제 and did the rank than G 10 year, and 10 year Tawa Jabachino Gomgores, the Digom Nadi, and the Garsore, 2 more Gomnadi.
There are 2 ways then to perform this meditation, one common and one uncommon. We'll look then at the common way or the shared way first. So looking at the text, the shared or common way to meditate on the 4 close placements of mindfulness is to investigate both the general and specific characteristics of the body, feelings, the mind, and phenomena. So what this means then is that for each of the observed objects, their general and specific characteristics are investigated. The observed object of the body, its general and specific characteristics are investigated. The observed object of feelings, its general and specific characteristics are investigated. And likewise for mind and phenomena, each individually, their general and specific characteristics are investigated.
Nyande da ranja de ye ne tambanye shalu le mi be tambanye ja komyodo kanis kongors ne mi de lu la mi ba de lu la mi che de ne lu ke ten do range chenyi da ji chenyi ni ke jeba che she na gongorwa ne de kongore da janju semba nam gi lu tambanye ja komyodo lu la mi de mi ba de lu la mi ne ane lu ke do ane range chenyi na ji chenyi ni ko ne jeba che na gongorwa ji dan di ni ga gi Janju Semba da Nyandwe da Rangya Janju Semba Khonsu Sumga ki Lula Mibe Jamanya Ja Gomyodu Mikpa Lula Miba Jikpa Re Ane da Jeba Chidu Lugi Tendu Ane Ngara Chigorasana Rangya Tsenye da Chi Tsenye Nyi Jeba Cheda Jeba Chino Gomba Imba Jikpa Niga Jikpa Inza Di Gomnadi da Tumo Gomnasi or Tumo Gomnasi.
Therefore, this common or shared way to perform this meditation, it is a shared way in that it is shared between the 3 types of lineages. So hearers and solitary realizers, those 2 of the Theravada lineage, they meditate on each of the 4 observed objects by way of each observed object's general and specific characteristics. So the hearers and solitary realizers will meditate on the general characteristics of the body, for example, as well as the specific characteristics of the body. And they will also meditate on the general characteristics of feelings and the specific characteristics of feelings, and likewise for mind and phenomena. Bodhisattvas share this. Hence, it's a shared way to perform this meditation, and therefore they too, on the observed object of the body, investigate the general characteristics and the specific characteristics, and on feelings, the bodhisattvas too investigate the general characteristics of feelings and the specific characteristics of feelings, and likewise for mind and phenomena. Hence, what we see here is it's a shared way of meditating on the 4 observed objects, shared in terms of hearers, solitary realizers, and bodhisattvas.
Lui Tambanya Sha said the community, that Lui Tambanya Sha said the Todi, Lui Tenki, and Lui Tendo Tado Maduba, Tado to be Tomba de la Miche, Tenike, Lui Tendo Kasake, Da Mebatela. Dame de la Miche, Della Mi Pigé, and Shineta, Laton to Kurwa, Teneza, which is Lula Mi Pigé, Casore, Tamanya Com Gubicum Senditirwa. Lula Minet, Tamanya Com said, Lugi Tendo Dame Bashorwa, Dame Bato, Della Mi Be Shinetu, then Della Mi Bel Laton to Kurwa, Chisel Laton to Gonza, Lula Mi Yu de Lula Miche. And Tamanya come said, this is what Congo come to.
Taking the first observed object, that of the body. So when this is meditated on as a close placement of mindfulness, then first the body is investigated and realized that it is selfless. Then that realization of selflessness is held with calm abiding, and then with development, also with meditative insight. The objective then when meditating with the close placement of mindfulness on the observed object of the body is to realize that it is selfless, and thereafter to hold this realization of selflessness with calm abiding, and thereafter with calm abiding and meditative insight. In order to be able to perform this meditation well, to come to that realization, the body, the situation of the body, the actual situation of the body, this needs to be clearly understood. To come to understand the situation of the actual situation of the observed object of the body well, then the body needs to be thoroughly investigated in order to realize that it's selfless. And how to perform that investigation is first to meditate on the specific characteristics of the observed object, the body. Thereafter, to meditate on the general characteristics of the body. So this is the sequence. To meditate first on the specific characteristics, thereafter on the general characteristics, in order to realize the selflessness of the observed object, the body, and to hold it then with calm abiding and later meditative insight too.
수기 풍보 그런게 내상데 그런 거 간다시에 사실은 담보 수기 풍보 그런 경우 내상데 하고 그래 지산디 간다시도 제바체야 될 랑게 생이 랑게 생이를 제바제바시 그래.
What then is meant by the specific characteristics of the observed object, in this illustration the body or the form aggregate? Well, the specific characteristics are referred to the essence or the entity of the observed object. So that is what is first investigated, the essence or entity of the form aggregate.
가지래 풍부스데 간스 두고래 아니 유가를 때네 용고래 간스 두고래 세제바치 삼다들와 지산도 제바체도 나 저기 수기 풍부스데 간스 두고래 세제바체도 아니 지게 밤에기 고자 제니 뒤발에 때네 안 두화제 줍제 대수기 때네 줍 내니 줍네 아니 델이야 아니 지게 사다 추다 매다 룽 중화시 유죄 차상 중화시 초되게 초비게 차상 유되게 도시 두고요 바체 내내 제바체 안도스는 삼다에도 풍부들이야 이제 풍부랑이 생이 제바체 다들 뒤치고래 아지상 어디 랑이 당보 주변에 간증한 풍부대 간증 두고서네 밤에게 고다 제라 되는 두고요 바 직장을 주다 민가지게 나지게 당아서 미로시는 가 정하게 미리 삼당 담마 담에는 당보다 소수기 다지 Pumba let me be Tamanya Commude, Tambo Pumba Senji mix of Comset, Pumba de Mosungora, Pumba de da, Ganeshil Migorasene, Pumba Kanju Majule Mina, as a Kumara Chesapena, Sosu Pumbo with some tabina, Sosu Pumbo de la Samna, Chesan Sosu Pumbo de da, Ganes Tugore, Serge. Sosu Pumbo de Mo, Ganesh Sembe Chevachedu, and go Tambo Ganes to Mo, Ganes to Chevachedu, Chesango, Rapa, Tambo, Rapa, Samtana, then on the Pumbo de Pa, Pamiki, Kuta, Dune, Trupti, Trupe Dubal, and then ya Chinan, Chuda, Lucas or Mare, Juda, Juma Chazan Soja, then he gets Salonja, ya, Church, Rotugan, and then there's some Tango, Rada.
One starts with one's own form aggregate, one's own physical body, and starts to investigate what its entity is. So one will therefore, to come to know directly one's own aggregate, one will investigate how is it established, what are its causes, and so forth, to understand one's own form aggregate well. So here we see that our own body came about through the joining of the sperm and egg, and that's how it was established. And then it was established with the four elements of heat, water, earth, and wind, and thereby grew into eventually its present state. But this is how the form aggregate came about.
Gyälwa sonanga jugi pene sha dang cha dang ba ba ru da de ne mang bu cho de cho ne zhu de cho de ba yin ba ji ji san de ne ge cho ni su ji wo su ji su su ru su rin wa ji su gi ba ji wang zu wang bei ge xie ba le de na ha ko tu ya ge ben su gi pong bu cho de mi ge xie be tong du rong wei ge su ji yin ba ji ji san zu pong bo de ne ge zhe mang bu cho ba de ne zhu be ge su ji re xia sen be ge sam da de jie ba jie de da 무수 용어와 레샤스비 데니기 제바제야디다 거랑아서 풍부하라 랑게 챙이 제바제바시고래.
Moreover, we observe that the eye consciousness can observe the form aggregate and all the substances that comprise the form aggregate. This collection of substances such as flesh and bones and blood and organs and so forth. All of these are observable by the eye consciousness. So this is how one engages in the investigation of the specific characteristics of the body, coming to understand its entity.
ane duchen mangbo statue melon duchen mangbo sobegi susu jubi suju mo yimba da hago de rangi chenyi se da hago gorwa da chesanga zu phungbo di da suji resha sembegi da deni suji resha sem hago de da rangi chenyi da hago gorwa.
In this way one comes to know, to understand, to know the specific characteristics of our body, of the form aggregate, knowing that our body is the form aggregate and it's comprised of many particles coming together.
Shebadang and the Demetije, Tabala Sobala Yomarwadi, the Nigi, Duten Sonio Juptuenji, Shebaya Mare, Tabala Yomar, Demetije Yomar, Mevanza, Chesa Rangi Seni Mato, Sulumato, Shandal Meva, and the Duten Sonio Jupu, Susurumadi, Sulumato, Shandasule, Shempichela, the Mod Mevainza, the Rangi Senila, Sukor Rangi Senires, Mato Shandala Yomar, Hesachko, Rangi Senires.
So one comes to know clearly that the entity of our body is form. It is not consciousness. It is not non-associated compound phenomena. It is not permanent phenomena. It is matter, form or matter. So again, through this process of investigation, one comes to realize the entity of our body, and that is that it is form or matter, and only form or matter, nothing but form or matter. It's not consciousness, It's not a non-associated compound phenomenon, and nor is it a permanent phenomenon. It is only matter.
Dine su di rangi tagajile su la minne tambani je komi da tambo su korongo ngo gane himba ni ne ta de ha ko ko ro inza rangi tsing je ba jina kombas an dine ga ha ko ndo je ba je che la na kalli gresna ya ja an su koron la an jige gane 되기도 그 윤능부라 간에 되기도 간에 제제 지게 용구도 세베 제바치도 그런 유단 긴le 되네 두바체 아니 유네 두네 계지 그 유아테도 유르고 마도 마주와 아니 딱바체 되 유네 마주와 자와니 유에 매바 당보 주바데 지마지진 유어기네 줘야 매바데 되네 매바체 그 계지 유주바다 유아들 제바치 거로 제가 유가 낼시네 가릴티네 유도 가케진이바 두기되면 제바치도 계지 유어주바 다 미다바 제게 수디 수용어디 코롱 뒤텐기 제 손에 줍되겐기 임바지게 안데야 계지기다 유단 견라티네 주바 제가 유단 견라티네 네거마도 그 계지 유어 지조바마도 마지바 따바팀부 자와기네 두 민두스 제바제도 안에 제바제도 고 계지 미다발라 제바지고로 수기 어디 다 따바레도 미다바레도 제바제도 다고 미다바 임발라 제 아고도 보라티네 다 제도 안데 수경 대야 수경 오래 제바제고로 봐.
In this process of investigating the entity of the first observed object, the body, and looking at the specific characteristics, when one comes to see that it is matter or form, one also investigates to see that whether it is permanent or impermanent, and seeing that as it comes about, in dependence on causes and conditions, it will change, and moreover it changes momentarily. Therefore, it is an impermanent phenomenon. It is not a permanent phenomenon. So one comes to realize this too when investigating the specific characteristics of the observed object, the body.
기고 오래 세드 유디 당한도 대시 당보 삼다 유디 규락바르지 징아한도 파미기 류 가서 구다이제 제설린 두고레서 규락바르 다시거로 근데마 제바지게지도디 디 안디 가르리든 예라 나가지게 데네 용외 유디 가와리고레 세드 다게와가메기 레 사발라 데네 레게 제고 레게 제고레 세상 데네기 파미오 쿠다 듀바텔라 남시파 슈야디 가르치는 슈고레스네 개왕하면 레기 똑기데 슈고레스 지나 디닌자 팅하죠 개왕하면 레기 똑기 기고레스데 야 레라 되네 기고요 바디 바제바지디 지상하는주게 풍보디 다 레다 레라 되네 기고레스 지나 레디게 디양 레디안 간충고레스디 저기 개왕한 맥이 될 녀몽바데 녀몽보 원기 될 레사 레라드니게 지상 녀몽바 레다 녀몽발레드니 개와레바 개와 임바데 제바지고 그러바 데네 제바지도 다 먼저 풍보디 레다 녀몽발레드니 개와 임바다 하고 두고 그러바 제대 수부 귤레기 기시로 하다가서 수비의 밤에 구자 듀바딩한테 대주소 잡아서 디나데 남시 슈제 만족이 디 넘버 쉐바 슈고로 와디나래 개월에 슈고로 와 된남시 슈바디 가르되는 슈고로서 개왕하면 레기 온기 될이야 남시 슈고레스 지난 남시 슈고도 디 당보디 제디 밤에 규규 듀바레데 디젤라 남시 슈고도 디게 남시 디게 슈고네 리디 카르 듀베 카르 대지 수데다 남시 슈베 데네 가사디 규규 듀바 샤송을 와 제가 디 차바디 레기도 교중화래세
Here in the investigation, as usual, one starts on a coarser level, then goes to subtler levels. So seeing that this matter, this this form. It came about in dependence on causes and conditions, and therefore is impermanent and changes momentarily. So what are those causes? Again, on the cause level, it was the coming together of our parents' sperm and egg, and that was the primary cause or the substantial cause for our form, our body. And then, but for that to actually be a person, to have life, there were further causes required in that primary consciousness needed to enter into the fertilized egg. And primary consciousness that came to enter that fertilized egg also did so in dependence on causes and conditions. And that was previously accumulated karma. So karma in a previous life that had been accumulated propelled primary consciousness, our primary consciousness, into the fertilized egg. So therefore, that was the cause that led to the joining of our primary consciousness with the sperm and egg, of the fertilized egg. And that karmic imprint that had propelled, or that karma rather, that had propelled the consciousness, that had been accumulated in dependence as well. It was accumulated in dependence on afflictions. So here we come to see that the person has come about in dependence on the variety of causes and conditions.
And there, the niggy ludilla, that led on Yomo Shawando Soma, the Lucorala Rawa Metica, she's not led on Yomo Shawando Soma days. That the niggy Shawan led on Yomo Balatine, Gyälwa in Bachila, and the Ze and the Mambo Su, Mambo Saj, Jubigeda, Susuruma, Sushi Resha and Big, the niggy Luki Rashin, the Dinish Resha and Begeda, Jabachi the Commodo, Jabachi doing Ludi, and Dinishimago to Leda. Gyälwa leda nyomo be wangi junde begi junwa gyudi leda nyomo wangi junwa che deha junwa rede deha an ze tute mambo sa ku dubegi an susuru suji bare saje je kichi juwa gyote kichi juwa de taba timbo meba kichi juwa de midabe ran je dene leda nyomo bo wanle junwegi an susuru wa chire sadi denigo jeba ha jede da Sutila media, Rangi Tingi Jeba Sigurwa.
Here then in the reflection of the specific characteristics of the observed objects, the body, of this close placement of mindfulness, we see that the body has come about in dependence on a collection of causes and conditions. So these would be the karma and afflictions, one stream of causes, and another would be the substances, and the variety of substances, not just sperm and egg, but then also the elemental substances of heat, moisture, and so forth. So here we see that these variety of causes have come about together for the body to be produced. And it was done without freedom. It naturally came about. Naturally came about in the sense that under the control of the causes and conditions, this form came about. It wasn't something that one had any say over the matter. Because it's the body has come about in dependence on causes and conditions, it is impermanent, and being impermanent means it changes momentarily. And all this one has come to realize through investigating the specific characteristics of the body.
Deni inzada, da ngazu pumbo di nju leda nyomo wale deni chunwa, ane ngo kurang kichi jikba juwa zhuwa dikin juwa zhuwa yoba yinba. Deni ki yinba chila, ane ze mangbo choba le deni zhub dibi suki rangshin chirimba di, susu rungwa chimba di yinba che. Da deni ki lu susu rungwa di, ane kari chigwa resene, lu tela deni kari ligwa resene, dunga je, dunga chowa dunga je da, be dunga yo, ane dunga yongo ya, ane lu tela tene Gabriela tsoa digi devoro tos chumbene lamsa tsoa di gyurchene ane chike gyurchene ane karsore dunga howa chisan dunga kiya da gyuru dunga kiya chisan pumbo tela tene garligo son dunga gyuru dunga yungu chisan tenige ne le masona ngazu tisugi pumbo teta dunga yaya da gyuru dunga yaya ki ne chirochi tene ne rochi imbadi 하고 해야 제바지네 되네 하고 그걸 와다
We're seeing in our meditation that our body comes about in dependence on a variety of causes and conditions, and as well as many substances, and therefore it changes momentarily, being impermanent. Having this basis then of this form aggregate, this is the basis upon which we experience the suffering of physical and mental pain. Due to having this basis, this physical basis, we experience this first type of suffering, the suffering of physical and mental pain. Moreover, we also experience the suffering of transient pleasure. So these two types of suffering, the suffering of physical and mental pain and the suffering of transient pleasure, are experienced because of having this basis.
dunga ki yodu dunga chakpora kina dunga de jaduge samba kya da dunga di yir dewaro chen dela mipi chakwa kya da tene chidu ane jesa dunga tupura chuna dela dene kongro kye dunga che dewaro chowa dene kina ane karsore gyuru dunga de kye yodu dela ya chakwa kya da tene chidu tene ke chakdang di kye yodu 그러면 뭐 바나 가서는 겨워치마 류되네게 냠발래기 아니 땡지고래시 제가 류냠발래기 규사야기 규디 땡데라 사사야기 땡지고래시 제가 디네 인자 류디 내간래래샤스 내간래스 네세드 세들야 동아기 동아도 규동아 중에기 땡지에게 내암 뇌로 내래샤스 렌스도 겨워치마기 동아기 데니게 동아 용야기 레기 kasol gyudi dele den lüdi la sagdus lüdi den de la sagdus cheza lüdi nengal le yimbadi hago go jebachi du jebachi lüdi nengal le shas chene ondu sin hago go reje.
We're seeing here then that the mere acquisition, or due to the acquisition of this form aggregate, this body, we have achieved the basis upon which we will continue to experience these two types of suffering, the suffering of physical mental pain and the suffering of transient happiness. And as these experiences arise, we experience the suffering of physical and mental pain. We wish to avoid the suffering, to overcome it, to avert it. Or when we experience the suffering of transient happiness, we desire ever more of this. And wanting to push away, to avoid, to avert the suffering of physical and mental pain, anger, frustration, annoyance, repulsion, they all arise. Wanting to experience ever more suffering of transient pleasure, attachment, desire, craving, these all arise. And from the arisal of these afflictions of the class of anger and the class of attachment, we create ever more causes that ensure that lifetime after lifetime we once again achieve appropriated aggregates. And so therefore in this way we continue to create the causes to remain bound in this process of uncontrolled rebirth, because we're continuing to create the causes for further appropriated aggregates. Appropriated having the meaning of taking, these aggregates being taken, and thereby continuing to have the basis upon which one will continue to experience the suffering of physical and mental pain and the suffering of transient pleasure. And thereby, this wheel of suffering is perpetuated from lifetime to lifetime.
Na du sine nga zu ge phungpa la mi de rang ge chenyi ge jamba da shi ran yi ko ne jie ba la yon de je sa da lu de nga da bo lu de la mi ne lu de zhup tang ro chi ba ju da jian le de ju na di ma xie xie lu chen nan lu yong o de ni tu jie ba jie de le ya jamba ting go ro jamba ma jamba na nga zu ge de le ya jamba tian jie ko samdang jamba tian yu de la mi pe jamba tian mi de yu de la samdang de jamba gi jing go ma de jamba mi zi ba na yu de jie ro ba na yu de la jie ba jia ho xie de gi jie ba jia yo ma ro ji san yu pong bo la mi jie jamba gi jing xin be tian jie jamba tian de le ya da xie de gi jie ba ji de lu de yu ka le gi du kan le gi de ne gi du wa se be jie ba jie de ne jamba da xie de ni jie ba 두 제바 제도 근데 잠바 텐제 시럽게 제바 제도 가라하고 그러서는 류디 유 레다 뇽몽발라데네 gyälwa 아니 기지 직배 라신 미다바 임바 다바마 미다바 임바 아니 류디 체티게 동아다 유에 동아 망게기 조에게 네 아니 마음바나야 데니게 동아 녀야기 아니 풍보 동아 녀야기 주 사야기 영화야기 규사야기 땡제바 땡지기여바 지사 데니기 땡지기여바체 데네 풍보 데니기 풍보디 데니기 뒤진 망보 초비기 제 망보 초비 수수루마 이바 수시레 샤스베게 데니 제바체 하고야디 나 잠바다 시진이기 잼베파 땡제 데니 셰르게 제바체제 데니기 니수디 차상 풍보디다 데니기 임바데 하고야디 지사 류라 데네 랑기 챙이고네 제바진의 점바의 시신민 셰럽기 제바체고 공부하셔야 돼. 랑기 챙이 공부하듯이 차고르다. 근데 랑기 챙이 공부하들라 제주의 미제 신의 공부하듯이 시 배시시고 말들이야 고치 점바된 제 셰럽기 바 제바체시 고 뭐 간데도 유간데실에 기도 디게 내탕 간데시도 세배 제바체한테 제바체시고 제바치고와 진짜 랑이 챙이 제바체도
And let's summarize then how to engage in the investigation of the specific characteristics of the first observed objects, that of the body, within the practice of the close placement of mindfulness. So one observes the body. The body then is the observed object, and one holds the observed object with mindfulness. Without mindfulness, one will forget the object, one will lose the object, and then how can one investigate the object with wisdom? How can one investigate the specific characteristics of the observed object with wisdom if mindfulness isn't holding the object? So this is the function of mindfulness. It holds the object. And in this case, the object's not just the body, but it's the nature of the body, in that as one with wisdom investigates the nature, then mindfulness continues to hold the observed object. Then, holding the observed object with mindfulness, its partner here, its companion mind, that of wisdom, investigates. And investigates the specific characteristics of the body. And wisdom then investigates, for example, the causes that led to the body, in order to come to understand the body's nature, or not nature, sorry, essence or entity. And through the process of the observed object being held with mindfulness, investigated with wisdom, one comes to understand that the body is comprised of matter. It's come about independence on causes and conditions. Therefore, it is not permanent, but impermanent. And being impermanent, it changes momentarily. Moreover, this body is having acquired this body without any freedom, one has once again achieved the basis upon which one will experience suffering, the sufferings of physical and mental pain, the sufferings of transient happiness. Moreover, not only will one continue to suffer in this life because of having acquired the basis of suffering, the body, but one will continue to accumulate the causes that will ensure that in future rebirths we will also have to take a similar basis upon which we will experience suffering, and thereby our suffering is perpetuated. So this then is how one engages in the meditation on the specific characteristics of the observed object of the body with the close placement of mindfulness. And from this summary, hopefully it's also now clear how one engages in the close placement of mindfulness, not solely with mindfulness, but also with wisdom, that wisdom is imperative. Then lastly, at this point, one doesn't try to develop calm abiding on the result of one's investigation. When one comes to realize the entity of the observed object, the body, one doesn't here try to develop calm abiding.
풍부 될라티네 둥아이 유에 둥아 아니 기기도 지상 풍부 될라티네 둥아이 리기도 유에 리기도 지상 풍부 그런 유 레다 녀모 원래 때와 기때네 깨와서 레다 녀모 원게 기위기 풍부 시샤스 지상디 다 차와두지 둥아래 해서지 둥아네 지상 둥아이 템바세디 대다 레다 녀모 원게 기위기 상황도 줄디 베기 풍부디 아니 풍부래 샤스 하고도 나 동안에 봐 걸어와 돼. 진짜 레다 규가르스는 레다 녀모 완전히 개와래셔. 진짜 풍부디 규 레다 녀모 발레트네 기위 레다 녀모의 상황도 규 풍부래셔서 하고도 동안에 봐다 걸어와.
So hopefully then it's clear that this close placement of mindfulness at this part is analytical meditation. Thus far it is solely analytical meditation. Whilst one is utilizing mindfulness, because it's being utilized with wisdom, it is analytical meditation. And one comes to the realization that our body is an illustration of a true suffering. Our body is a true suffering because it is the basis upon which one experiences suffering. Due to having this basis that is the appropriated aggregates, one will experience suffering. The suffering of physical and mental pain, and the suffering of transient pleasure. And this state has come about due to contaminated karma accumulated under the sway of the afflicted minds. So this is the understanding that one comes to thus far in the meditation.
then Lulu Guatoya, then the Sidongazuki, Korea Dunga Nimi Samta, Yorba, or the Yamna Chibacha, and the Korean Nimi Dunga some the cars of the Belgic, and Gyälwa, Ida, Dunga again, Dunga, and the Hala, Milikin, Dunga, Carsena, Chilule, Gabriela, Nazataya, the Niki, Chiki, Negi, Wagi, and Neam, the Niki Juan to be king as a Ludil part, the Niki Dunga, and the Niki Ludilia Dunga, and Gabriela, the Tigiroshi, Levina, then Lamsa, Kalash, symbol size, Tigi, Lamsa, you watch Dunga, you are the Dunga war, Joyada, and the Niki, and the Ludia in there, Gileda, Numo, Ungi Juma, Resha, Rawan Minus and some dated, Chesan Kovi, Kova said, Dunga Yarashi Resha, some Gomiadi and the Lambrim Nala, and Zugi, and Kibu. Dingy Lamidin by Yamna Jedada, Denicablo Sungorwa, Chesan Dida Dingy di Chibache to Chagorda. Sunhano, the Yamlin Jeta, Chevacheta, the Mida Suna Mida Mato, Dondala, Yamlin Jeta Chibachagore.
I'm sure from your Lamrim studies, you'll be recognizing here that in this meditation on the specific characteristics, on the observed objects of the body, this is in accordance with what you've learned in the Lamrim. In that, we have come to the conclusion that our body is a true suffering. So the Lamrim presents this meditation differently to come to the same conclusion. In the Lamrim, one reflects on the sufferings throughout the realms, in the lower realms and the so-called, and the lower realms as well as the upper realms, where we look at the sufferings of gods and certain humans. For example, the wide variety of suffering experiences that humans have, from the mere arisal of an affliction, whether anger or attachment, or the experience of unwanted circumstances. Or, of course, in the world, you're watching now in lockdown still, and there's so many sufferings associated with the pandemic, not just those who are desperately ill, but their families, or those who are suffering distress due to their work or being kept indoors. And then, of course, there's also suffering relating to attachment, in that as soon as one experiences contaminated happiness, attachment arises, desire for more, craving, not to be separated from the objects of attachment, to always experience this happiness despite it being contaminated. So this is the way that one would be used to reflecting on the sufferings of samsara from the Lamrim presentation, where one reflects on the wide variety of suffering experiences of beings throughout the realms, coming to the same conclusion, that as long as one has these appropriated aggregates, one has the basis for suffering and therefore will suffer. And that is the conclusion that one comes to here in the meditation on the specific characteristics of the body, and one comes to in the meditations in the Lamrim that are shared with a practitioner of intermediate capacity.
Dembashi Sanye Jimne Digi, Uruvarana Sele Tambo, Dembashi Son, the Chögyi Kola Tambo, the Dembashi Son watch the Dunga Demba, Dunga Sheba Cha says, Dunga said Hako Ures, said Dunga Demba Hako Ures, says Sonwa, Tiza, Diniza, that the Lula Minier, and Jugi Rangi Tsini, Jambata Shirani Yukone Jeno Komyodu, and Ludi Dunga Yirashi in Badako, Dunga Demba, Chesadi, that the Denigi Cheba Chedu, and Dunga Demba, which is a Dunga Demba Shinane, Dunga Demba Nyamle Jebet, Dunga Demba Nyamle Jeba Chechi, Dunga Demba Hako to water, just that Dineza, Demba Shinane Shebana, Dunga Dembalia, Jeba Cheki, Dunga Sheba Cha, Dunga Demba, Hako Jeba Chetashi, which is a Lu Lula Mina Rangi Tingi, Jeba Che, Rangi Tingi, Nisu, the Sheba, the Hako do, Chisa. Dunga Sheba Cha said, Dunga Shingore, Dunga Demba Shingore, so that the Demba Shinane, Dunga Demba Nyamle Jetati.
Here in the meditation on the first observed object, that of the body, one comes to see that the body is the basis upon which one experiences suffering, and therefore is in the very nature of suffering. It is a true suffering. And this then accords with the first wheel turning at Varanasi, where Lord Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths. And he taught the Four Noble Truths, with the first being true sufferings, and he taught true sufferings need to be known. And here, through the practice of the four close placements of mindfulness observing the body, one comes to know that the body is in the nature of suffering. It is a true suffering. And thereby, here, one comes to realize the first noble truth, true sufferings.
당저 덴바니 라브나 군조 덴바다 돈나 덴바 세스니 요로와 디셰바네 덴바니네 군조 덴바라 제바 차고로 군조 덴바라 가스는 풍보디 군조로와 제자 풍보 코로나 미제 풍비용고 계지 규갈레티니 기에도 그런고 내탕간에 니기도 유아간에 스토도 제바제야 델라티네 동하다 간에까지 용고 치고 제바지도 군조 덴베게 제바제야 차고로 군조 덴바라 제바제 제자 덴바니에 지네 셰바네 군조 덴바라 제바 덴바시 고데 셰바나 동하 덴바라 제바 만행아 주게 냠슬림베 림비게 람림베 냠는 지다데 두스타베나 아는 저 기부 가소레 코유 동아리아 倦다제 델라 타르도게 삼방이 좀 기에게 돈달라 코유 동안의 倦 단에 안 델려 어도 동아게 倦다제 곰바 고미야지 디시고로 지나 기월 징게 람지림비 냠는 제다 순거와 어디 대제다 한주기 디가 셰바는다 류점반녀자 나네 류점반녀자의 류레미네 랑지 천이기 나네 랑이 천이기 제바 제자 곰나지 대콘도 차상 돈달 지변의 디스 차상 고 지와 자르고도 와.
In this meditation on the specific characteristics of the body, the first of the four observed objects in this close placement of mindfulness, one comes to realize the first of the Four Noble Truths, that the body is a true suffering, the basis upon which all sufferings are experienced. And in terms of when Buddha taught that was the four truths and the two truths, that of conventional truth and ultimate truth, this investigation thus far is that of conventional truth, because the body that is being investigated is a form, it is a conventional truth, and one's investigating its conventional nature, its causes, its nature, and so forth. So here, one has come to the realization of that it's a conventional truth, that is the first of the Four Noble Truths, it's a true suffering. And this meditation is in accordance with what we come across in the Lamrim, where one reflects, to come to this conclusion, one reflects on the sufferings of samsara to give rise to definite emergence. So here we can see how this meditation ties in with what we're used to, the presentation we're most familiar with, that in accordance with the Lamrim.
난 풍보들 미제 랑게 천이게 제바 제주도 진의 풍보 코로나 귤레다 녀모 엉규 중화 계지계지 집에 라신 임바 되네 동아이 동아나 유에 동아께게 된 제바 나 마오바나 되니게 동아이 풍보 야께께와 레야게 디텐 텔야 네가소레 되니게 규사야게 된 내가는 제바집이 된 지기요바 되니게 지기요발라 뭐 그런 수수로 수지임바 되네 하고야도 하고와데다 류라 랑기 층이 제바제네 잠바다 시진 셔런 이거는 랑기 층이 제바죠 겁나듯이 디하고자 나디하고 차위 제라 나 되니게 풍보들 미제 다 지층이 세되 다 지층이 내가선 다음에 받으래 내 다음에 봐 디된도 다음에 보고 먹거다 다음에 봐 제바제제 다음에 보고 매듯이 거래.
One starts, as was mentioned earlier, in the shared way to meditate on the four close placements. One does so with the observed object of the body, meditating first on the specific characteristics to come to understand the essence or the entity of the observed object, the body. And here one has come to realize that the body is impermanent, it changes momentarily. It's come about in dependence on causes and conditions, and therefore is impermanent. It is a true suffering. And moreover, having such a body, we continue to create the causes that will ensure that lifetime after lifetime we continue to take appropriated aggregates, further basis for suffering. This you've come to realize through reflecting on the specific characteristics of the observed object, the body. Then one moves to the general characteristics of the observed object, the body. And the purpose of investigating the body through its specific characteristics was to realize its essence, its entity. Now, the purpose of meditating on the body through its general characteristics is to realize selflessness of persons.
Many Dumda Oman is a Gaza Damela do Chetamjit de Shachu, the Tinu Balab, some Tavan, Gaza Damela do, and Chetamjit in the Share Marada. Mevazada, Damia was searching in the Pistasha. Jinagani, that got the Gaza Dame Balamna Digor, Dagazile, two more at Kishigorwada. The Dagazile, Gaza Dame Lamna Dame Balana, the Dame, the G. Relawar. The G. Laved the Carrilabna. Dame about the Chetamji in your church, and it's not Dame about it. Dame about Inza, and the Chetamji Dame about it. It's a Dame about the Chetamji into your body. Your banza, called Che Cabargam about Chazan into your banza, the G. Tingy or the Chile chapter, the G. Tingy Relawada. See the Gaza Dame Vegetana, Digor Dame Balamna Digor Camino.
Just to quickly correct what I said in the last segment. I mentioned selflessness of persons, but it should just be selflessness. And I checked with Gyälwa, and he says to ensure that this presentation, because we are looking at common or shared way to meditate in the four close placements, that it's shared with all view holders, Buddhist view holders, whatever their tenet is. Let's just talk about selflessness, because there are divisions later in some of the tenets in terms of whether one refers only to selflessness of persons or there's a selflessness of phenomena. So let's just talk about selflessness. That's more general, and that is more accurate. So, having reflected on the specific characteristics in order to realize the essence of the observed object, the body, one then moves to the general characteristics. And the general characteristics are thus they're called general, because they relate to all observed objects. Whichever object one is observing, one will investigate them through these same characteristics. Hence, these characteristics are general to all observed objects, whereas we've been looking at the characteristics which are specific to an individual observed object.
And the ring on the Garasheva de Lamna, and the Lu Tamanya Shakom, the Rangita, tomorrow comes to the tomorrow comes to Nisha, that tomorrow comes to Della, Gina Rangi, Gasolula, Misha, Ranchi, Sini, Daniel Combacha, the Sadi, the Rangi Sini de Carre, G. Sini de Carre, Sadi, Cabrache, Rangi Sini de Pumbodida, Carsore. You led on Yomo on your Juma, Yimba, and it Dunga, near Dunga, the Dunga, Niga Dien, Gyälwa Dien Jaba, Maobana Dunga, Denigi Pumbo, Leagi, and it you Sabe Dien Jibiki, Nianga Yimba, and it Denigi and Dia Susu Yimba, said the Denigi Jeba Comnadi, Jambada Shirani, Daniel Comnache, the Rangatin you Comnadiche. 다 랑게 생겨 다 디나 디젤라 안 디된도 지층이 공고거래 지산 지층이디 고미야데 가래라나 지층이데 랑아서 가사 다음에 봐서 투모시 투모위게 냠는 제다가 셰도 가사 다음에 봐서시 지산다 가사 다음에 봐라인도 다 가사 다음에 봐서디 아니 최 탐지기 된도 요요레스 지산다 가사 다음에 봐서 간데 라고리랍나 지산 가사 코로나 제바나 가사 풍보다 체제 강라마 랑응원이 마주바디 두베 동화들라 아니 가사 다음에라 그래 제로와 가사 다음에 봐도 디지 칭이리 다 데니기 가사 풍보 다 가사 다음에 봐라위도 랍탄로 니체고로 가서 가사 코론 풍보다 체제 강라마도 봐 랑응원이 두베 동바암 세고로 동바암 가사 디기 롱주자 마주바 세고로 롱주자 마주바들라 아니 마주바들라 가사 다음에서 차용을 지사 다 되네기 디 당한 저기 지층이 세들이 해서 디간 저기 제자다 다 제래 다 제마들라 당한 저기 두친데 당을 써야다 삼나리아 어두세다 되네기 레슨비게 삼다야디 저기 디링이 셔야기 디모터지 다 제마들라 다 풍배된도 아주 지층이 돼 제바제 뭐 꼼다 거래셔야지 된 마셔야지로와
Let's summarize what we've looked at here in this session. So we've come to the second of the 8 outlines for the close placement of mindfulness, and it's the way to perform this meditation. And we saw that there are 2 ways that this meditation is performed, one which is shared and one which is not shared. The one which is shared has 2 further subdivisions into general and specific characteristics. So first, one meditates on the observed object of, say, the body, reflecting on its specific characteristics with a purpose to come to understand the entity of the observed object. Thereafter, one meditates on the observed object's general characteristics to realize that it's selfless. So when one meditates on the specific characteristics of the body, then one meditates on it to understand its entity. To understand its entity, one reflects on the causes that led to the body, and there's a variety of causes. We spoke about the substances as well as the causes of contaminated karma and afflictions that led to primary consciousness entering the fertilized sperm and egg. And from this one sees that the body is a dependency, a dependent arising, dependent on causes and conditions. Being dependent on causes and conditions, it changes momentarily. Therefore, being dependent on causes and conditions, it is impermanent. Being impermanent, it changes momentarily. So here, one then understands the entity of the body, but moreover, one takes it deeper to understand that the body, having come about in dependence on contaminated karma, it is the basis of suffering. This appropriated body is the basis upon which we experience suffering now throughout this life. We experience the suffering of physical and mental pain and the suffering of transient happiness. And with the experience of this suffering, afflictions arise. Those of the class of anger, those of the class of attachments, and so forth. And this leads to the accumulation of further causes, which will ensure that life after life we continue to take these appropriated aggregates and continue thereby to have the basis upon suffering. In this way, we continue to suffer. So here we come to realize, through meditating on the specific characteristics of the body, we come to realize that the body is a true suffering. Moreover, we see in this meditation how we utilize both mindfulness and wisdom. Mindfulness serves to hold the object, in this case, the observed object of the body, and wisdom is to analyze. So this is first and foremost an analytical meditation. Thereafter, having come to understand the entity of the observed object, one then will meditate on the general characteristics of the observed object. So the first set was a specific characteristic, specific being, specific to each observed object, hence specific characteristics. The second set are characteristics which are held in general to all four observed objects. And the purpose now of meditating on the general characteristics is to realize selflessness of persons, which we've heard then described tonight, that means that the self is empty of being able to utilize the aggregates, and that this is one way to understand selflessness. So next week, we will continue to look at the presentation on selflessness as within this context of the way to perform this meditation, and see what the faults may be with this understanding. So thank you, and then we'll conclude here.